Hey, everybody, welcome once again to another episode of Político with me, your host, Juan Collado Díaz. And today I am recapping on something that I spoke about in the first season of this podcast with Tarek Mohammed, who is a Palestinian activist. And today I'm going to recap this. And, I want to talk a little bit more about the Palestine Israeli battle and like the genocide that is going on over there. But I want to go over this in a way that we can talk, to someone who's doing the activism work here on the ground, boots on the ground. So I'm going to ask you to, first of all, introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about you and what got you into, supporting Palestine in this world of activism.
Okay, so hi, I'm Janos Jalics. I am an organizer with your local Cleveland DSA, if you will. And my start with Palestine activism is basically it began all the way back in 2019. So for context in the whole Palestinian liberation movement, so like it was 2019. No, it's the Great March of Return. And the Great March of Return was when basically during was a non-violent way to resist the occupation and blockade of Gaza. Basically, Palestinians would march up to the barbed wire border of the Gaza Strip, if you could call it, the Gaza Strip, because, well, it used to be, well, a lot bigger. But anyway, so like they would do that continuously, as many numbers as possible, to basically get the Israelis to continually try it. And that's when Abby Martin also put out the famous film Gaza Fights for Freedom. Very good. And I was like, I can't stand this anymore. While I was taking my college history class on Palestine, I was like, okay, so I face this down no matter what. It's just pure conscience and the fact that I know history at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard you, you mentioned DSA. And for those that are not familiar with what DSA is, do you mind sharing just a little bit about DSA and like the work, the DSA does?
Shoot, this is where I am terrible because so like DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. So while I'm an official like dues paying member of DSA, I attend like zero events of DSA. Predominantly most of my events are with actually the Party for Socialism and Liberation, aka the PSL. Or like Cleveland Palestine Advocacy Community, aka CPAC. And like so you might actually want to go for like a different person on like DSA, but yes, we do. But yes, there are like, but yes, we have like DSA members who like serve as like protest marshals and and like obviously the usual like Palestine protests, including is like dotted about with like DSA members. It's a little bit disorganized sometimes, but like we show up in whatever numbers and capacity we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we talk a little bit on those parts, but you also mentioned, the work that is going on and you're educated about history, and a lot of people are not educated about the situation going on in Palestine and the situation also going on, then this is not October 8th. This is nothing new. This is something going on for over, if I'm correct, 70 years now. So would you mind like sharing a little bit of that history, like for those that don't know what's going on over there?
Okay, so obviously we have so like the story arguably for like Zionist occupation of Palestine, it begins in about the 1870s. So obviously we have generation after generation of European persecution of Jews throughout much of the European continent, if you want to call Europe a continent. And eventually it turns out that some who have taken on the idea of Zionism, mostly through what was then the more religious side, setting up under the rabbis, they made like the first and second aliyahs, aka the returns. Aliyah's return in Hebrew, I believe, and they started making small settlements in Palestine. Most of these failed, but then with the establishment of political Zionism with Theodor Herzl, they began expanding, and there will be obviously more settlements in Palestine. But at this point in time, like and for most of its history, right up until like the end of the Second World War, Zionism was actually a minority ideology among Jewish people in general. In fact, most Jewish people were actually some brand of like non-Zionist or anti-Zionist. Like think of the Jewish Bund that served predominantly in Eastern Europe, or the or the or like various sects of Reform Judaism. But unfortunately, basically with the beginning of the Nazis in 1933, a lot of those anti-Zionist like Jewish groups basically began falling off. And that was predominantly, as far as I know, like work of the Nazis and the Zionists themselves. The Nazis actually were being opposed at the time with a Jewish-led boycott around the planet, basically led by various Jewish organizations. But then the German Zionists got into a meeting with the Nazis, later known as the Haver Agreement. You can look this up. Haver is Hebrew for transfer, and they agreed to basically absolutely wreck the Jewish boycott in exchange for getting visas to Palestine that would also allow them to basically transfer their capital, their businesses. And that basically allowed them to do that while it was also lights out for the boycott. The Zionists did assassinations, they did secret meetings with some other Jewish organizations, I believe, as well, and they basically managed to shut down the whole boycott. And then the Nazis did basically the Holocaust on Jews, LGBTQs, the Roma, all sorts of populations, and of course the Zionists already had an agreement, the Balfour Declaration with the Brits in 1914, to have Palestine as a Jewish homeland, while it was being administered as a British mandate in the 30s and 40s. Then then with the end of the Second World War, with the pressures of the Holocaust, the Allies and the UN basically thought it was best to partition Palestine into both the Israeli state and the Palestinian state, but this partition was obviously quite disastrous, and that led to the Israelis going up and basically conquering, taking over many Palestinian villages all across Palestine, and they liquidated them, massacred them, and that's how you get to basically the occupation that exists today.
Yeah, and with this occupation, we have seen a lot of people dying. That's one of the sad things that we have seen the most is individuals, on top of land getting taken. We're seeing a huge part of the Zionist movement that are okay with, children and families, mothers, fathers, just people being like prosecuted and also executed based on their nationality. I wanted to share a little bit, I guess, for those that don't know, like the Zionist movement, it's a huge political nationalist movement and goes now it's larger, as you said, that it used to be before, and it's for the establishment of this like national homeland in the historical region currently that we, the people who are like, on the right side of history, know and understand and call Palestine, to where some others just call it Israel because that's the name that has been given to. And, you have done a lot of work around it. And one of the things that you're doing, and you did I believe it was last year, correct me if I'm wrong, was you did a fasting, and I'm not sure how long the fasting was. A group of you guys did a part of the fasting together, and
there have been multiple fasts done by the Cleveland, Cleveland pro-Palestine activists.
So yeah, do you mind sharing a little bit about those, if you don't mind, like about the fastings and like what is the symbolism behind those?
So basically, like most of these fasts that I've worked with, I've mostly coordinated with my friend and comrade Don Bryant. He is the president of Cleveland Peace Action. He has been involved in some form of activism since the Reagan era. Since basically the Reagan years, and the whole idea of fasting is it's meant to be not only a respect to, you could say, Palestinian religion, regardless of whether it's Christianity or Islam. Obviously, Islam is famous for fasting during Ramadan, but in many ways, Lent is a form of fast for the Christians in some ways. Like, you are made to give up stuff. Obviously, like some people make it into a whole ritual of you give up the electronics or you give up that. But I think it's for many people who are within the site, it's like you have to give up the food more specifically because you are in many ways giving up. You're giving up food to symbolize the whole idea that it's not just that Palestine is starving. It's literally that Palestine is being starved by the Israeli occupation, and that is whether you're inside of Gaza or in the West Bank. The Israelis control the water. The Israelis control what food comes in and out of Gaza. They've said basically since 2006, Gaza must be put on a diet, and now they've turned that into full-on extermination. And so, like, we are reflecting that basically Israel is counting calories for the people of Gaza while controlling the water resources of the West Bank and much of the food that goes into the West Bank, period. And we are also giving out the full respect to the fact that both Christianity and Islam have essentially some form of fasting. Like, even outside of land, Christianity has had days of fast, like going back to like the Middle Ages. So there you go.
Yeah, and that, and on top of that, another part of the activism that some of the activists, are doing around is relating boycotting, right? They're boycotting companies. I've seen a lot of the boycotting going on, and some of this include, like companies like PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, that are like the big, per se, like the big dogs in the industry. And then there's other companies that are still doing it, like McDonald's, there is Starbucks, there's big companies, that are
Don't forget Disney.
And don't forget Disney. There you go. Like, Disney's like, one of the largest ones right now, also with like huge worldwide history, but also money, doing this. And, some people just look at it and they go like, boycott doesn't work, or, it's like worthless and have a purpose. What is the purpose? When you go out and boycott, what is your like set in mind to, like, when you're boycotting, what is that purpose you have in mind for it? Like, what is the outcome do you want to see?
So I think I'm going to start flexing my master's degree in history. So boycott actually comes from Irish history, specifically during the potato famine. There was an Irish landlord by the name of, I believe, was John Boycott. I'm not exactly sure whether his first name is John, but like, point is, he was a very predatory absentee landlord during the time of the Irish potato famine, when Ireland was basically being purposely starved by the British. And he decided this was a golden time to basically jack up the rent on his Catholic Irish tenants. And the Irish then decided, his Irish tenants decided that nobody is going to give him money. Nobody is going to take his money. Like, if you have a small shop, don't take a single dime from him. And that is basically how the practice was born. But the thing is, so like, when you're boycotting, you are doing two main objectives. First off, you are refusing to invest your money in companies that are openly committing genocide. That's a big first thing. Secondly, you are using these boycotts to tell people about what is happening in Palestine, about how these companies are affecting what is happening in Palestine. Like, like, people ask, like, okay, why are you boycotting McDonald's? They give out free meals to the IDF. So there you start. Or Starbucks, they've been big supporters of the IDF for ages. There's been free meals. The CEOs, that includes Howard Schultz and I believe the guy who's in charge right now, they've both been giant Zionists. So like, you say no to food, you say to certain foods, you say no to Israeli tech. And also, if you're trying to get a new iPhone, please don't. The iPhone 17 chip is literally made in Israel. So yeah.
We're like, the boycott. It's, by the way, thank you for this history. I'm gonna lie to you. I went to school for politics, and I did not know this history. So I learned, for as much as everybody else learned something new, I myself literally learned something new today. And that's something I love about this podcast, is just learning with people, and like, just getting to know what's going on. And one of the things that just make me more like, myself following this boycott myself, is seeing how it's actually is working, because it's putting companies to understand. I've been really big with the Target boycott, understanding, that Target it's an awful like company. I mean, most capitalistic companies are to this world, but Target's been one of those that like loves to just act like they're on your side, but they're really not, right? And
yes, they do. Yes, they do. They'll have the Target Juneteenth or Pride merch, and then they'll sneak in the Republican donations back door. And it is definitely one of the picturesque examples of what Martin Luther King himself would call the whole like white moderate, if you will.
No, yeah, exactly. And that is exactly what it is. It's like, it's a white moderate. They're being, if you want to call it like moderates in a way about this. And, one of the things that I like to sit down and talk with people when it comes to this issue is the reality right now that we're seeing is, people are being hurt. People are being like executed, as we said. There is illegal, like there's war crimes happening every day when it comes to this, right? And not many people are understanding then this is a real issue. It's a real situation. It's something that is going on, and people are not looking at it and going like, holy shit, this is huge. And people like us who are seeing it, we are either, we're taken out, or we're like being called crazy somehow. And it's just, people are not seeing the reality behind this, right? And my question, I guess, next comes to be, how can we educate others? People that may be oblivious to this, or people who just may not want to even, understand that there's an issue. They don't want to see it. How can we educate people like that and actually bring them to understand, like, hey, there is actually something going on here. Like it's visibly a bad thing, and you're not coming forward towards to defend like the people.
I think the thing is, so like, obviously I have a master's degree in history, but I can't dispense the full knowledge that comes with that at like every demonstration that I go to and whenever I try to convince people. The big thing is like, you have to often come to understand like who you're talking to and try to explain the struggle in general, and obviously what's happening in Palestine to some extent, like in a way that they can understand it. Like, for example, one of my uncles is a right-wing Catholic. Which means you usually are, hearing the Zionism straight from your like local Catholic priest. So my usual approach to trying to get him on my side, although I've not succeeded, is basically you have to communicate it to him through the Palestinian Christian population. The Palestinian Christian population, they have been heavily persecuted, and you have to use the symbolism, whatever knowledge like you might have of the Bible, and say like, look, this is what Palestinian Christians specifically are going through, and I can give you testimonies from actual Palestinian Christians. Like, for example, in the West Bank, there is Munter Isaac. He runs the big like evangelical Lutheran church over in Bethlehem, and he has shown up in all sorts of different ways to like American media. He has books. He has, I think, multiple interviews with Tucker Carlson at this point. At least one interview with Piers Morgan, and like he's probably appeared in other places I can't name. And there's Mother Agapia, who is a nun who also does work in Palestine. She has also gone on Tucker Carlson and other places. I mean, like, Tucker Carlson is let's just say, despicable human being, but like, a platform is a platform. If you can go on there and say the right stuff, you'll bring in somebody.
Exactly. And I mean, it is correct. Tucker Carlson is, and I would use the term, he's a piece of shit, for lack of better words, because we like, we have to be honest with some stuff, and that's one of the stuff that I want to be honest about. He is an awful individual, but his platform is so large, then sometimes like you have to give up a little bit of that, like, thought and pride per se. Like, you don't want to go and support one of these people, but you have to support one of this, like, in a way to get the support you need too. But like sometimes, the far right is sometimes so in their world where they don't understand what's going on unless someone in their area tells them. If you're not talking to them like a kindergartner who's like telling them, like, this bad, this good. If it's not like a Republican Sesame Street telling them what's going on, they don't bother to understand it. And it's one of the biggest things that we're seeing, and I want to make sure that we can share that, and we can also like bring that out to people, because it's it's a topic that needs to be talked to. It's a thing that needs to be understood, and it's something that like we as a community to come together to do better. So around that, one of the things that I wanted to getting closer to here to like the closing, I wanted to ask you, what are ways that people can from here from the US, like right now support the people in Palestine? I know you've been doing a little bit of that work too. How are ways that we can support people in Palestine and just, provide to people that may need our help?
I'd say like the first thing you can do is just simply talk. We are in the United States, the literal, I guess you could say, belly of the beast of this whole American Israeli operation, where we are exterminating a whole entire ethnicity off the face of the planet, so that we can essentially use those tactics that are used to exterminate Palestinians and basically throw them straight on whoever else is going to dissent. But also, you can often find a lot of like Palestinians in Gaza through like their social media. They'll have essentially some sort of donation link in their bio, and you can probably hit them up with a certain amount of money if you feel comfortable about it. But also, like, there are like certain like big donation campaigns. If you like, for example, the Cleveland Palestine advocacy community particularly reaches out to Palestine through Ashraf Abu Kamada. He is a Palestinian on the ground. As far as I know, he is raising money still to evacuate, but he is on the ground. He is helping to provide fresh, clean water to the people of Gaza. I mean, in a time when water has never been more scarce in Gaza. I think it's like less than 5% of the water in Gaza is drinkable. Probably even less now that I'm saying that. If you donate to these campaigns, that'll obviously help them on the ground. Another thing, I hate to be ringing the alarm bells on this, but we are coming upon two major sections of the national defense, one of like different bills that are going through Congress right now. First one is Section 224, the National Defense Authorization Act, aka the defense budget, if you will, or the war budget, depending on like whether you want to go with like Department of Defense or Department of War, which is just the United States being more honest with itself, and Pete Hegseth being an absolute jerk. Or you can, and there's also a section of the Intelligence Authorization Act, which is basically what guarantees funding for the CIA, FBI, and so on. And both of these sections are basically guaranteeing that Mossad and the IOF are going to be essentially merged with the CIA, the FBI, and the American Armed Forces. So like we are going to integrate operations. The CIA and Mossad can't keep secrets between each other anymore. So like the United States won't just be the IDF's like biggest arms broker. We will be, in fact, its literal. We'll be in fact basically merged with the IDF, with Mossad, essentially. And if you can make a few calls to Congress and to the Senate, like saying like this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening, I think you're going to give the Palestinians a lot more than you'll ever realize.
Yeah, and in a way, we need to tell also our government one of the biggest things, and I think at least I haven't met an American as of today that can probably agree more with this, or someone in this land. One of the things that we can all probably sit down and agree on is that we need to start focusing on putting our money, in America. There's homelessness. There is so much going on. And here, there's homelessness, hunger, poverty, housing crisis. There is an opioids. There's a drug crisis in this country that we could be putting that money to support people, right? And instead we're sending it to Israel, a foreign country that has no interest in supporting America whatsoever. And also, why do we need to focus on Israel, like when we can be focusing on the problems that our people have here? And every time, just like I tell people, just this, every time that you're going to Starbucks, every time that you're going to McDonald's, every time you're even just liking a post from like the government itself today, from the Department of War, Department of Defense, whatever they call it these days. You are in a way yourself supporting this like genocide because you are supporting Israel. So one of the biggest things, is educating each other, telling people what's going on. Podcasts like this, I mean, like people have podcasts, talk through those, upload a video to social media, share someone's video, like share one of Janos' videos, like share someone's video online. Make sure you share what's going on, so you educate the people that may not know. And we can bring this also to the communities that need to understand more. Because, if we unite, we can take this big monster out. But if we just stay behind closed doors and we act like we don't know what's going on, we give it a blind eye, we are going to be the ones that are going to be responsible for this. And we are already responsible for many things in the world, and we're responsible for this in many ways too. So right now, as responsible people and a responsible nation, our goal should be to fight and actually make sure that we can get people and the community to understand that we can do better, we need to do better, to make sure that we can make a better thing, or like a better outcome for the Palestinian people, and we can restore peace in Palestine, we can restore a community, and we can also bring justice to those who have been suffering for so long due to pretty much our tax dollars, our money going to companies, ourselves putting ourselves out there and doing this. It is definitely time for us to say enough is enough and to just fight for human rights, for humans itself, no matter who they are. And before I leave you all here, today in this episode, I want to ask you if there's ways that people can find your work, your activism online. How can people follow you, and where can they find you in this world online?
So the predominant way that you can find me is through my Instagram. I have a relatively small Instagram, YUFEI235, also known as UFA235. It's named after a Chinese general. And honestly, yeah, that's probably the best way you'll find me. I've totally abandoned TikTok because it's run by Larry Ellison, extremely pro-Israel billionaire, and that's the one I feel probably most comfortable being public on and reaching out to people.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that those are put in the show notes for this episode, with also all the other information, links to everything, so you can educate yourself in what we talked today. And I want to thank you so much for joining me. This is a huge thing that we need to continue talking, because it's not just one protest, it's a battle that has been going on for too long, and it is time for us to put a stop to it together as much as we can. So for those listening, if you want to learn more about the activism and the work we're doing, just make sure to visit the show notes, which will be linked in the description of this podcast on all platforms that you're listening to. And until then, we are at least 5 episodes before the season of Político is coming to an end, and we'll share a little bit more on that in the next episode. But thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch up sometime soon.
All right. Thank you for having me, Juan.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me. Thanks so much for listening. If you are enjoying Político, make sure to listen and follow on all podcasting platforms. If you are interested in learning more about the topic that we spoke today, follow the show notes at www.politicopod.com. Político is an Inquisitor Media original production hosted by me, Juan Collado Díaz. If you want to learn more about the work we do on our advocacy work, make sure to follow or visit Político at www.politicopod.com.